Hey guys, welcome. And we are on the hour. Let's wait another minute or two for everybody else to join, and then we will get going. More folks come in, which is a good sign. For second, we were afraid that because of the weather, like people would choose to go otherwise or elsewhere. But I believe that's nowadays that's not really an option because majority of folks are recommended to stay indoors. So I guess like that is a good alternative to spend your time. And I hope that I will make it worth your time. All right, let's get going. Today we'll spend some time talking about the analysis of SharePoint code. You might have heard about it, you might have read about it, and like oftentimes we hear the question at Ranker like, is it just analysis of code? Can I do it myself? Can I do it with other tools, or is it something else I need to take into account? And that led us to the idea to basically host a webinar and talk about it. Like, is there anything special about it or not? So how does SharePoint application code compare to, I don't know, let's call it ASP.NET app or any other apps that you might build? And then with that, to give you a better idea regarding what kind of things do you need to have in place in order to do it efficiently and effectively. Before we jump into the meat, if there's anything you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A because it's easier for me to see it than it is in a chat. And then also afterwards, if we don't get to answer everything that you have asked, it's also easier for us to go afterwards to the Q&A and see what are different things that folks ask and then address them afterwards via email. Okay? So with that, let's get going. So before we start, actually this is already a part of it, but why would you be interested in analyzing your code? And I'd like you to type in the chat, like what do you think? Like what might be a reason for you to analyze your code? If you have an idea and you'd like to share it, please type in the chat like some of the things off top of your head. Like why would you analyze SharePoint code? To increase the quality, very good. Any other ideas? Vulnerability and secrets, security best practices, all very good reasons. Anything else on top of anybody mind? 3, 2, 1. Cool. So in short, avoid issues, whether they're coming from adhering to best practices or security or performance and whatnot. So basically, like general idea is like you don't want to. Let me click that. Yeah. Basically, you don't want to hit issues in production, right? So basically, you want to test things upfront to ensure that whatever you put in production, that is going to work. Long answer is that like oftentimes we talk about things like tests, right? So you will have unit tests, you will integrate things. And the thing is that tests don't catch everything. Like tests only catch things that you know that could be the case. When you build a unit test, you make this test based on assumptions. And these assumptions are something that you know, right? So you know there's input and you might test it whether it accepts a string, a number, empty input, something else, long string, short string, Unicode string, emoji, and so forth and so on. So these are all the different assumptions that you project on your application based on some assumptions that you make. But what if you actually don't know that something might be an issue, right? So for these things, you wouldn't write a test case because you simply do not know about it. Another thing for which you might want to test your code or analyze your code is that you don't want to do QA on the users. Right? Nowadays, there's this mentality of let's ship fast, fail fast. That is all good, but still, you don't want experiment on users because that will then basically lead to a very poor image of you, your company, or the internal IT, and eventually it could even lead to eroding trust, right? Because if things will fail time over time, sure, you will fix it, you will address it quick, but still perception of users will be, well, these things fail, like our IT or a vendor build things that simply do not work or last, right? So that's definitely not something that you don't want to have this image. Another thing is that you don't want to have downtime in production. And we will get to that why this is important, especially in context of SharePoint applications. You don't want to have downtime in production. Then in the end, you also want to be able to meet the needs that people have nowadays, right? Like things move fast, businesses move fast, things change a lot. And when there's a requirement, when there's a need for application or a change, you want to be able to ship it fast. You want to be able to empower the business to do their work as effectively as they can. And that means sometimes that whatever they need, you have to ship quickly. And you can only do that with confidence if you know that whatever you have built, whatever you've changed, that works. Okay? So what makes SharePoint special? And for that, I have a poll for you that I'd like you to take a minute and vote and tell us more about like what you use SharePoint for. Whether you use it for communication, collaboration, records management, knowledge management, and you can pick as many as you have. And I'm sure there are some other things that you could do as well, but like keep it really like to these 4 areas. That would be enough. We see majority of folks use it for collaboration. Well, there's basically a close grouping between the others as well, right? So we basically see, and let me share the result with you as well. Can I do that? Yes, you can. There you go. Share results. You should be able to see the results as well, right? So majority of folks use it for collaboration, but there's also a part where it's for communication, record management, management. So you basically see that it's being used for a wide range of things. And that is exactly the culprit. SharePoint is being used for many different things. Often it's even used for things like board meetings, facilitating collaboration around board, HR things. So in the end, it often also halts confidential, sensitive data. Interesting part also is, and that is what makes it so appealing to everybody, is that you can adjust it to your needs, right? So you can just make an application that can be as simple as a part of script. You can adjust views. You can do a variety of things without even being doing it through the IT to make it yours and to make it more useful. But on the other hand, to add something that wasn't there initially, right? You can customize it to your needs, and that can be done by anybody. And the trick is, oftentimes these applications that you add are basically run as a part of the environment, whether that's intranet or collaboration side. They run as an integral part of it, and as such, they can do whatever the person who's currently on a page can do. That application, that piece of code can do too. And in a second, we will get back to like why is that an important thing. But if you have some experience in this area, you might already have an idea where I'm going at, right? So like there are over years we build different kind of apps, right? And I'd like you to tell me what kind of apps do you build? So do you build SharePoint frameworks, apps, add-ins, WSPs, script editor, web parts? And I know that there are different kind of apps still, but just to think about the 4 big ones that have been there for a long time, and that basically over time we got new abilities to build applications to extend SharePoint to our needs, but these ways that we had in the past are still available, right? So you can pick in the poll whatever kind of applications you build, or maybe even you use if you don't build them by yourself, basically to illustrate like where on the spectrum you are. And I will give you another second or two to vote if you haven't yet. All right, cool. Let's end the poll and let me show you the results. So we see that majority of you are already going to SPFX, right? That is the new model that was introduced 3 years back already. So time flies, and it's good to see that majority of you is already adopting the latest recommendation from the Microsoft team and follow these new model. But there's also a fair share that is kind of equally spread across add-ins, WSP, script editor, web parts, and in a way, it makes sense. If you've done any investments in the past, let's say 4 years back, 5 years back, SPFX wasn't around then. So you had to use something else. If you were in a cloud, you could only choose from script editor, web parts, or add-ins, right? And then if you're on premises, it might make perfect sense for you to build up USPs, right? I recall a while back, I talked to a customer who basically had a very strong stance where they said, you know what, like we chose to be on-prem because of reasons that we have. And for us to be able to truly benefit of that investments that we've done and that we constantly do with our people, our farm, our networks, maintaining all of that, to really get ROI on that, we choose to build WSPs. Why? Because they integrate better, they allow us to build richer solutions on-prem comparing to anything else that they could have done at the time with add-ins, right? I mean, in the cloud, you don't really have much choice. Plus, there are different things comparing in a cloud than on-prem, right? In a cloud, you get, for example, update every week. On-premises, this is not the case, right? So there are different things that you have to take into account depending where you are, where you live, what kind of things you build, what you use, and what allows you to customize your environment to your needs, right? So if you look at different types of apps that are there that we can build nowadays, available today, right? So there's, first of all, there's the SPFX, the SharePoint framework, which is the latest addition from the three you see now on the screen, and it's 100% client-side framework, right? So there's no server-side bit to it. If you need anything server-side, well, you can build either add-in or just regular app that will then connect to SharePoint or 365 via OAuth and things like the Microsoft Graph or SharePoint REST and so forth and so on. In SPFX, the good thing is that it follows very much like other web stack development approaches that we see everywhere else, right? So like there is this notion of npm being package manager that allows you basically to tap into over 1 million packages that are available for you to use for free that basically instantly power up your application that you build. And as such, they free you from having to reinvent the wheel and allow you to focus on the things that are specific to your application, your scenarios, requirements, and business, right? Now, when you build things in SPFX, they become an integral part of the page. They are not embedded inside an iframe unless you choose to, right? Because in SPFX, there's this option that allows you to isolate your code, and then it will run inside an iframe. But that is an explicit choice. Typically, you won't do it. And also the way to, or you cannot isolate extensions. So you can only isolate a web part. But as such, as a consequence, the code becomes an integral part of the page. So whatever the person is currently on the page is allowed to do, that piece of code you put on a page, that web part you build, that extension you build, can do too. Well, by itself, it's not really odd. I mean, it's just a fact of life. But it becomes interesting when you think of it that what if your application that, I don't know, shows the weather, the world clock, the stock ticker, and whatnot, use some piece of code that you haven't written and pulls that piece of code on the page. And suddenly that piece of code can do it too. At that point, it becomes really interesting, right? Because these are the things that you have to take into account. Now, because that code is 100% client-side JavaScript, there is no way to elevate anything because you basically run as this user. You can automate things on behalf of the person currently on the page. You cannot pretend to be someone else. You cannot be application only because there is no application. You are just basically a piece of code running on a page as a user. Now then we also have add-ins, which consists kind of these two things. There is this client-side code that runs in browser, because with add-ins, you can build an add-in which is which can be displayed, for example, as an add-in part, a web part, or it can be an app. But there will be basically a web page, a web experience that can run client-side code. But there's also this another facet to it, which is managed code, which you're going to run, for example, for things like if you need to elevate, if you need to um, run a long-running operation that would otherwise fail in UI, right? So it's these two sides. The important part about add-ins is that add-ins work only within the scope of permissions that you granted it to it, right? So when you install an add-in, you will see a dialog telling you this add-in wants to do X, Y, and Z in your tenant. Do you allow it? And at that point, that tenant will only be allowed to do that, nothing more. So in other words, if you allow add-in to read data from a list, it will only be able to do that. It will not be able to read data from, let's say, another site, right? So it will be really physically limited to only the resources to which you grant the add-in access. It will not be able to do physically anything else, right? And because there is this managed code aspect to it, you can elevate, you can run as app only, which is helpful if you want to do, let's say, long running operations, schedule tasks, and so forth, and so on. But again, that has to be granted to the add-in by the person who installs it, right? Without it, add-in cannot do anything, cannot access anything. And then finally, we have a model that is available since roughly 2006, WSPs, which is basically managed code that runs on the farm. And because of that, it's only available on-prem. Right? It's not available in the cloud. So if you are on a prem, you can choose to build WSPs. The benefit is that it really tightly integrates with your farm. So whatever you build will take part in backup and restore of your farm. You will not need another server to host anything, and so forth and so on. So from that point of view, it's simple, but it comes with a price. Because if something in that code breaks, it can potentially bring down the whole farm. So it's powerful, but it also comes with a big price tag. And that's basically a conscious choice you have to make, whether you want to do it or not, right? Right. So with that, let's have a look at reviewing your code, right? Because some of you might do it already, some of you might not. So if you do review your code, I'd like you to tell me what are the different aspects, or how do you review it? What kind of approach do you use? And I started a poll. If you have a moment, I'd love to hear from you. How do you go about a review? Like what do you do? Do you not review it at all? Do you do it? Do you do it manually, dev only? Do you maybe use SPFX already? I don't know. So please tell me how you go about the review. And we see majority of folks doing manual reviews. Hey, there is someone using SPFX. Perfect. Very good. We see some third-party tools are being a part of the build. Linters, very good. Manual reviews take majority. Perfect. So 3, 2, 1, let's stop. Let's have a quick look at the stats at the outcome of the poll. Right. So as I said, majority of you looks manually. Basically, you open the package, you look at the code, you look through things, if it makes sense. Some of you don't review it at all, which is, well, fact of life, right? You might not have the manpower, you might not have the ability to scale for that, you might not even have the expertise, right? So it's a reality of life. And some of you use also development tools or tools that integrate in a build. So when you think about it from the review kind, there are basically two ways in which you can approach a review. There is developer or development time review, and there is admin review, right? So developer time, I mean with that, like you build an application and you want to see, does my code work? Or is it okay? Is it fine? Is there anything I need to address immediately, right? So it's kind of these two things. One is errors. Good thing is, if you write manage code, if you make an error, compiler will catch it. It will not allow you to build a code with an error. So this is good. Also, cool thing nowadays, especially in TypeScript and in SPFX, is that TypeScript will also allow you to catch many errors. Like if you think about before SPFX arrived, if you wanted to build anything in script editor, web part, or you would build ASP.NET app JavaScript, well, if you made an error, that would be very much hit and miss, right? Because like many errors JavaScript wise are not often visible at first. So you would need to basically do whatever you have to do to arrive to the point in your app where you test it and like, oh yeah, it breaks because some condition is not met. So good thing is nowadays that TypeScript addresses that, many of them. And manage code, you also have compilers, right, which will not allow you to build a code with errors. But there's also things like improvements, like how complicated is your code, right? Because it might make perfect sense for you, and you might have all of it in your head when you write it, but then you get back to it in 3 months' time. You're like, geez, like who wrote this thing? And then you look through the log, it's like, oh crap, that was me, and then you have no idea what it does. And it's like I catch myself regularly doing that. Like if I go back to the code I wrote half year back, and a day like I had either a bad day, or I didn't comment, or I would be distracted, like my code will be very much soup, and it will take me a while to realize like what was I thinking here, like why are things the way they are, right? So there are ways for you to analyze your code and to discover how hard is it to maintain this code over time, right? And there are ways to measure it. There are also some ways to look, for example, at performance thing. Like so, if you build, for example, Azure apps or other things that are async in nature, there are tools like the async checker that will allow you to check, do you do async incorrect ways so that it doesn't block threads, right? So there are a number of different tools that will allow you to check different aspects of your code in development. But then it's like, what about the rest? Because when you build SharePoint app, there's a big portion of it that is specific to SharePoint. There are things like manifest, platform dependencies, take dependency on SP Web or SP Site. There's like many of these things are very specific to the world we live in and platform upon which we build. Right? So if like you need to also think about that, like if you make a typo in the manifest, you refer for example to, I don't know, a field or content type isn't there, like compile time, like that will work just fine because that isn't compilable code. Packaging wise, like there's nothing that will check that up front, right? So you will only know about it like way down the line when you try to deploy it, activate things, and there's like, oh, it fails, and then you will get error like exception occurred, and you will be totally um, um, at a point where you're like, okay, what's wrong? Like it will not be easy for you to realize like what went wrong exactly, because like the errors that we get are not they don't explain well where the error was. Right? So these are also like, if you think about SharePoint apps, there's this also the non-generic code bit and also manifest that you also have to take into account, because many errors occur exactly in these areas. Now, as I said, there's also this other side of review, and that is being done especially by admins. And admins want to know one thing: what's inside the package? Because look at it from their point of view. They get a package with the command or ask like in production, and they're like, okay, but what's in there? And they might get a document or not, and the document they get might match the package that they got or not, but there's really no easy way for them to find out about it, right? Because like they will get a package, and the package is a zip, and inside the zip there might be a DLL, and like how will admin know what's inside a DLL? And also admins don't read code. If they read code, they would be devs. So how admin get confidence that whatever they are to put in production will not do harm, right? There is no easy answer to that. So when you think about SharePoint apps, I'd like to hear from you in the text, just in a chat, like what are the different things when you do a review, and majority of you does it by yourself, like you don't use tools, you do it by yourself. So when you do a review, what are the different things you look for in the code when you do a review? When you look at the code, like what do you pay attention to? What do you check, if you like? I'd like to hear from you in a chat, like what are different things you do? No one dares to say what they do. 3-1. Object reference, no business info there. Very good. That's a very important thing. No business info, no emails, no credentials, no passwords. Very good. Exe file type. Okay. Yep. Very good. There is no exe that belong inside a package. Correct. Although if you have a zip, and imagine that you would have a timer job on-prem, or there would be, you might want to have a long-running operation or a scheduled process, like that might become an exe, right? Disposal, camel queries, large list queries. Yeah, these are all valid SharePointisms that we need to look for. All right. So if you ask me what I look for in applications that I review, it depends. And I don't mean it in the it depends way, things like, it's the easiest answer that we know in SharePoint world since ages. Well, whatever someone asks you, you would say it depends. No, because it really depends on the type of applications you build. Because like typically you would go across these areas, like you will look at performance things like large queries, camel queries, inefficient queries, and so forth and so on. You will look at credentials as security things. You will look at maintenance. You would look at, so, but that it very much depends per type of app. Because for example, in SPFX, security wise, like you don't want to store any credentials because it's a plain text script. That script being downloaded to browser. Like the user can, anybody can see this code. There is no way to obfuscate or hide it. Right? You can complicate it, but still that code will be available in browser. Right? So that's a different thing to look at. For example, if you think about, let's say, WSP. Security wise, sure, if you put credentials in code, it's bad, but it's never being surfaced to user. Right? On the other hand, WSP wise, if you create instance of an SP site or SP web, you need to dispose them, or they might bring down your farm. On the other hand, that is not an issue for add-in or SPFX. So you very much need to know what to look at depending on the type of application that you build, right? And there's also this thing, especially if you get application afterwards, like you might be faced with this. Like this is a code, this is a production code of an SPFX web part. I wish you very much good luck reviewing this and making sense out of this, right? Because like not only it is packed, but also variables are changed, right? So they are being shortened, they are being optimized to load in the browser, but they are not being made to make it easy for you to review and read, right? So if you need to review optimized client-side code or even a DLL, it is not trivial. It is not easy to go through this and make sense out of that and check whether somebody references an object that isn't there, or whether the references make sense, or whether something malicious is being done somewhere, right? This is not trivial stuff, right? And the good thing is that there are a lot of tools available to us already. So there are tools that allow us to lint input, to check things, to scan code for example, XSS injections, and so forth and so on. There's majority or there's a lot of tools that already do all of that. But the interesting thing is that, well, these tools don't have the notion of SharePoint, right? So like they don't know of a web part. All they see is code. They open a package, or even not. They look at your DLL, and all they see is code. They see a JavaScript file, and all they see is code. And they can look for things like credentials that match a pattern, or they can look for connection strings, or for parameter injections, right? Because they can deduct that from, well, there is a method um, 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 that requires or that accepts an argument, and they can see, is that argument being escaped before it's being, for example, used in a query, like things like that. But this is where it stops. They cannot put the code in a meaning of SharePoint. They don't know what a web part is. They don't know what an extension is. What is custom action? What is a reference of a field to content type? What is a list, web template, and so forth and so on? They do not know that. They also know that there are 2 million ways to reference a script in SharePoint. Like you can add a reference, you can add a script tag, you can use a custom action, you can do it in manifest, you can do it in Webpack. So there are a number of ways in which SharePoint people can load an external script, but in which these external tools do not know because they don't have the context. They miss the context. And there are many different SharePointisms, as I call them, things like dispose SPWeb and SPSide, or do not query over item of a list, or don't execute, I don't know, more than 5 CSOM calls in a single query, right? Like these are things that we know because we've experienced them. We learned over time that these things are bad, but if you don't have a tool specialized in that domain, it will not yield these errors, right? It will basically say, well, this is what you have. Like I found these things, but it will miss a lot of stuff that is especially dangerous in our world. Because especially if you think about even things like in 03.37665, right? As I said, we get update to it every week. Every week there is change. And originally, years back, there was a pattern in SharePoint that would say, if you need to change something, it's okay to do DOM injection, manipulate DOM, that is perfectly fine. That was the case back when we were on premises, and when you would get an update CD every 3 years, and you would know exactly when you install it, roll it out, you would have the ability to test it. This is not the case in the cloud. In the cloud nowadays, we get an update whether you want it or not every week. And that update might be something that is totally irrelevant to you, or it might change a button from left to right. It might change a div of a page, right? Page DOM is not an API. There is no SLA on it. And Microsoft says openly now, stay away from the DOM. We are updating it, and we need to do it so that we can give you a richer platform, better environment, more features. But in order for us to be able to do all of that, we need to have the ability to change the DOM as we need. And for that, we cannot make it a contract between us, Microsoft, and you. But if you have a piece of code that did that in the past, and you have a piece of code that does that, well, you put yourself now in a place where your job now is to check every day whether that code still works, because there might be an update that breaks it. And again, that's something that generic code analysis tool wouldn't pick up. Even more, if you don't know about this yourself and you do a review by yourself, you might not pick up on that either, right? So these are just like many different things specific to our platform, our environment, that you need to take into account when you do a review. So with that, let's have a look at code analysis in practice. And for that, I have 2 things. So one is, I wanted to start with that. This is a piece of code that renders a table that you would typically use in a script editor web part, right? So here it has a template for a table. It references some scripts in here, some external scripts, and then here we have an AJAX request using jQuery to basically get the data from a list using REST, get fields, columns, and then render that inside a table. right? So by itself, like typically things that we have done over years, especially if you were not a, I would say pro dev, but you would be more on the front end kind of things, like you would be doing a lot of that, right? Basically writing apps with the code and abilities to customize directly in browser, right? Um, and the question is like, if you look at that, you might think, well, that thing's perfectly fine, right? I have a table that I put on a page, and then in here we get this div, right? So we append things to our own div. We don't change anything on the page. We just put the data inside our own page, and then we do some additional things. But then later on, you will see that, well, it's not as simple as it is, right? So there are some things that are wrong about this application. And then another one is that I have is an SPFX app that I have that you might have seen a few times already, which is an app that shows the weather, right? And if you wanted to review that, well, let's have a look. So it is an archive, and inside there is a folder named after GUID. There is manifest, there's some feature XML, content types. So you will go one by one. It's like, okay, so I'm looking at that. Is there anything interested in that? No, there isn't. And you basically will go one by one here saying feature XML activates the web part, which is perfectly fine, okay. And then you will go in here and then you will see XML, but you're like, okay, so I am getting a web part. Where's the code of that? Well, you say like, okay, so there is no code in here. There is no code in here. So where's the code? Like what? Because if you deploy this on a page, it will work. You will see a web part that shows the weather, and it will even allow you to choose for which place you want to show it, right? But then like, where's the code of it? And you will open this one and it's like, whoa, what is this? And then like if you will look closely, you will see that it's a JSON string escaped inside XML string. And then you will, like, if you look long enough, you will see like, okay, so there's a URL in here, which is something. Then there is some other URL in here. Like, being an admin, I can imagine you might have a really hard time to understand any of this, right? But if you really want to have the confidence that whatever you put in production is okay, you need to do it, because otherwise you basically, it's not different. They basically uh, close your eyes and say, I'm okay with that, right? That's not a review, right? That is not a confidence. That is basically a risk. So you could choose to go through it by yourself, or you could choose to use a tool. And the one tool that is specialized in SharePoint stuff, whether that's WSPs, add-ins, SharePoint framework, even PowerShell scripts, in other words, anything you can build in SharePoint or O365, this tool is specialized in reviewing. And it has over 1,200 different rules that apply to things like security, performance, best practices, and so forth and so on, and different artifacts as well. So JavaScript, PowerShell, DLLs. So across all of these, it checks for a big number of things to help you to A, understand what's inside the package. What do you actually put in production? A. B, is it safe? Is there anything? Are there any things that might break? Are there any errors that aren't compiler errors, but will break platform or will break when you try to use it? So first, let's have a look at the results of the first application that I had, which was the table that would show the request for the IT from a list. So I've run the analysis up front, and the first thing, being an admin, I want to know, okay, is what's inside. So apparently there's a file that references library jQuery. Okay, so this is already included. But apparently there are 3 references. So, okay, so now I know that this package uses moment.js, jQuery, data tables. Okay, so that explains something to me, right? And we plan to extend this overview more so that you will be able to understand, like, for example, what the application actually does. Like, does it call REST queries? Does it call an API? And when it does, like, which API it calls? Does it read from lists? Does it read from profiles, from taxonomy, and so forth and so on? Like, all targeted toward helping you as an admin to understand what is it in the application that you put in production. Now, when we switch to another view, which is the quality assessment geared toward helping you to understand, is this thing safe to put in production? And in here, we can see, well, there's one error, critical warnings, and there are warnings. So like just the fact that there's an error might is for many already a no-go, a sign to investigated or deployed in production. And here you see why. Apparently, one of the libraries that we have used, because here we see one, has a known vulnerability. And this is the trick. Your code might be perfectly fine, but because you pull something else on the page, that thing can be exploited. And that's especially important when you work with externals. So in scenarios when you work with extranet or even externals that might want to abuse your environment in any way, right? Or maybe there's even another piece of script on the page that will exploit this script, right? So there are different things you have to take into account, but the most important thing is that if there is a known issue, like you have to know about it, and oftentimes there's also available patch, right? So in here we can see that in apparently the jQuery version that we used, 1.12.4, needs to be updated at least to version 3 because there's a known issue in that, and we even offer you a link with additional info. The helpful part is also that we show you exactly where in your code the reference is, so that whoever gave you the package, you can go back to and say, hey, in this line, this reference is incorrect, or there is something wrong. Please adjust it, and the error is here. Because that helps developers or authors of the app fix whatever issue they have, right? And we do it for everywhere. So another thing is, for example, here, that we load a script without integrity hash. And what it means is that in here you see 3 references to the scripts. And we pull the script from an external link. Sure, there is a version, but our company does not own codejquery.com or cdndatatables.net or momentjs.com. So who's to say that the script that is there matches its integrity, that it hasn't been altered in any way? Like there was a case, I think it was 2 years back, where there was a known service that would allow you to embed a piece of script on a page, and that page would allow visitor of your site to play the contents of your pages. Like, so imagine you are visually impaired and you cannot see the screen. Using this app, you would be able, like, web page would read up the contents of the page. So that's a convenient thing. And that thing was used a lot. So there was like I think there was like 400 or more government sites across the world that used it. Someday, someone found out that when they would visit one of the affected sites, like the CPU usage would spike. And after investigating it, it turned out that the code of that site was adjusted somewhere after build and between publishing to CDN, and somebody would add a script that would mine Bitcoins. So in a term of public facing site, right, it wasn't a harmful thing. Sure, it's not meant to happen, but it wasn't as bad. But now imagine that the same would happen in the context of your intranet, where you store your contracts, your HR documents, employee records, and whatnot. That someone could, like that, inject a piece of script that would then use your search API and whatnot. And imagine your CEO comes on a page that has this affected script, and then suddenly that piece of code can do whatever your CEO is allowed to do on your internet, which often is a lot, if not everything. So like that is why it's important that whenever you reference a script, you also include integrity hash. An integrity hash is basically a checksum of file. So when author, for example, of jQuery or data tables makes a new build, they can say, okay, I publish this code, I know what's supposed to be in there, and the contents of the file are expressed through this checksum. If the file does not match checksum, the browser will not allow to run it. The browser will block the script and you will have a fat error, right? But you have to adjust, or you have to include this hash, right? And that is exactly what we see and explain here. You need to include this hash. And we saw that in our app, we have 3 references that don't have this, which potentially expose you to this threat. And again, we have the same, like we show you again, like where this is done in your app so that you can adjust it easily. And we have other checks as well, like for example, do not manipulate DOM elements and so forth and so on. And we do this basically for any kind of app. So just to give you a quick view into that, like here I have a result for SPFX app that I built. And again, like we haven't seen any code of that, but what's inside a web part? Also apparently, or what's inside the package? Apparently we have a web part, we have a feature, like, and we have JavaScript libraries that we load, jQuery 211 apparently, and we know all of that without looking at a line of code. We just ran analysis, which comes down to dragging and dropping a package on this tool, right? And then you will know all of that. But the interesting part was that when we originally looked at the package, like there was no code in there. But the web part works, so how does that come? Well, apparently, developers of this package chose to host the code externally. And this is what we see here. Apparently, developers chose to load the web part from location SPFX blob core Windows net, right? And in this case, me as an admin, I said that my company does not own this URL. So I will not allow anything to load in production from this URL, right? So we have a whitelist of URLs that we own, and whatever doesn't match it, it will be flagged as potentially something that could be at risk, because if I don't own this URL, I don't control, 1, the SLA, so I cannot guarantee the uptime, and 2, I don't know who has the access and when they can adjust it. And as I said, whatever you build in SPFX runs as the user on a page. So if CEO, HR manager, these are all very, or these are users with many privileges, and if there's a script that can abuse it, it could do a lot of harm, right? So this is why we flag these things. And the same thing when it comes to reference external scripts from a location that we do not own as an IT, or even to reference scripts that have no own issue, right? So these are the different things that we, within minutes, we can consistently discover in any kind of application that you build, whether that's a DLL or SPFX app or add-in. So to recap, what have we learned, right? SharePoint is critical system, and that is an interesting thing. Like a while back, we did a number of interviews with companies, and the interesting part was that when we asked them, is SharePoint a critical thing? Like 10 out of 10 said, no, it isn't. SharePoint is not critical to them. Critical things for them is something like SAP, basically ERP systems, the things that are core to the business. SharePoint is not. On the other hand, what we learned when we asked through is, they say, well, SharePoint is not critical, but if users cannot access that, the phone rings immediately. So there's kind of this disconnect between, well, it's not classified as critical and it doesn't get the appropriate attention, but when things break, people will call immediately. So it is important that it operates correctly, right? It is important that users can access it and that it's safe and that it's fast. There are things that we have learned, and that is especially the case in classic experience and on-prem, everybody customizes. That is exactly what makes SharePoint powerful, but it also, at the same time, is Achilles heel, right? It leads to trouble, it leads to issues, and you have to have a way to verify whether things that are being put in page, whether these things are safe, where they don't unnecessarily expose you to risks. Depending on the type of app you build, they might run within the page and they might not be limited by anything, right? So whatever the user who is on the page can do, this application will be able to do too. And this is especially important in SPFX, where the best or the common approach is to load things from external URLs, to use external scripts. Because yes, they speed up development, but on the other hand, they contain code that you haven't written, that you might not know, that you don't know what it does. So you have to have a way to ensure that all of that is safe. Over time, there are a number of ways for us to build applications, right? And all these different apps come with their own quirks, if you like. So if you want to do a review by yourself, you have to know what to look for depending on the type of app. So you have to know about expose rules for WSPs. You have to know about external URLs, external code for SPFX, right? You have to know about CSOM limits for add-ins. There are hundreds of different things that you have to know about to really do an effective review of any ad that was built, right? And generic tools that allow you to review code will take you only that far. They will look at common things like XSS injections or credentials and so forth and so on, but they will miss the SharePoint isms that often lead to the most issues that we hear about, right? I've showed you a tool that we at Rancor have built over years and that we offer to help you understand what kind of applications you have. I would encourage you to give it a try. Like you can go to rancor.com/spcaf and let me put that URL for you in a chat, rancor.com/spcaf. And you can grab the trial, give it a try, and if you like it, there is a limited time offer where you will get a discount if you choose to purchase it, right? But I'd love you to give it a try for the applications that you have, and basically tell us, you like it or not? Is it helpful or not? Did you miss something, or were we already of so much help that like, well, you already paid for yourself because you found so many things that could potentially do us harm in production, right? So give it a try. Let us know what you think of it, and we have few more minutes to go through any questions that you've answered or you've asked. And I see here one. If there's anything else on your mind now, please use the Q&A to ask it. And yeah, let's get to the first question that I see on the list. So is there an option to export the analysis results from SPCAF as PDF, for example? So when you run SPCAF analysis, you can run it in the desktop tool that you have seen in a demo that I gave, but you can also integrate it in your build. You can run it from PowerShell as command line and so forth and so on. And the results that you can get them as HTML report, which is basically the report that was embedded in the tool, but you can also get it as a Word, and you can also use it for automation, right? So there are different ways in which you can get the results, and PDF is also a format, right? So basically, so you have a formal document that you can either give back to your devs, give back to your teams, or even pass up the chain to prove that whatever application you have has been tested and verified up front, right? So yes, you can do that. Another thing is, let me see the question if I understand. So I'm looking at a question from Ralph. Besides this slide, is there a formal walkthrough of using the tool process? Yes. So we have a video and instructions. We have the knowledge base available that basically explain what are the different options for SPCAF, what it does, what kind of things it scans for, what are the different ways in which you can use it. So all of that is available if you go to rancor.com SPCAF, and from there you can find all of resources available related to SPCAF, what it scans for, how it can be used, how you can integrate it, and so forth and so on. And another question, is there a trial to run there to show off DevOps, right? So how, if you wanted to integrate SPCAF in your DevOps process, is there a way to trial that? And the answer is yes. If you're interested in that, let us know, and we will set you up so that you can experience like how would SPCAF fit into your CI, CD, and how you can automate it so that you don't need to analyze things manually. I guess that was it. So with that, thank you again for joining me. I hope you find it interesting and helpful. And if there's anything, do reach out to us either on Twitter, via email. You can find me, you can find Rancor in there. If there's anything on your mind, if you want to ask anything specific, do reach out to us. And with that, thanks again, and I'm looking forward to hear from you what you think of SPCAF for your code. Thank you.